So I often get questions, usually from the neurotypical wife, about their Asperger's husband. The questions are similar to something like this. It's like, why is it so difficult to have a meaningful, deep relationship with someone on the autism spectrum? And why do things seem to deteriorate over time? Basically, what goes on is, in the early going of the relationship, if she is the neurotypical, and we'll say that he has the high-functioning autism, she is his special interest. And the NT wives often say, in the early going, the relationship was good, sex was good, his empathy level was good, we had a great relationship, and as the years rolled by, he just became more and more distant. So what happens after the first few years of marriage, at least what I have experienced in counseling couples, is he kind of drifts away from the relationship and gets more involved with his special interests. And when this occurs, the NT wife, justifiably so, tries to reconnect and reestablish the bond, reestablish trust. And it's like the harder she tries, the more he distances himself. And so her approach raises his anxiety, her approach in trying to reconnect. And the more his anxiety comes up, the more he seeks anxiety reduction techniques. The main one being to distance himself from her, because it gets to the point where she is his major source of anxiety. And the more he distances himself, the harder she tries, and the cycle just keeps repeating at this point. So back in the day, when he first started showing more interest in his special activities, whether it's work or a hobby or whatever, started showing more interest in that than the relationship, she, with good reason, gets angry. Her thought may be something to the effect of, this is not fair, this is not right, I don't feel like I'm loved, I'm not getting the connection or the empathy or the compassion that I used to get. And so she gets angry and confronts the situation. And the thing never gets resolved. So now we fast forward several years, and she has had perhaps hundreds of angry episodes where she has confronted him in an attempt to get the connection that she needs. And these angry episodes have piled up over the years, and they have turned hard in the form of resentment. And now, in many cases, and some of you will identify with this, she becomes so bitter and so hurt that not only is her mental health compromised, but now she's starting to get some physical symptoms, numerous things, autoimmune diseases and so on. And then at this point, the Cassandra syndrome business can kick in. And so she's desperate, and she gets online and she researches, and she comes across this thing called Asperger's syndrome or high functioning autism, and she goes, this is it. This is why we've had such a disconnect over the years. And she researches, and she's convinced, and she's probably right, quite honestly. And she confronts him about it. She said, look, I think you have this disorder. And there's multiple reactions that can occur from the husband with the first realization that he may be on the autism spectrum. They run the gamut from, I think you're right, I probably do have that, I need to go get an assessment. And one other one that comes up a lot, which is on the other end of the spectrum, quite honestly, as far as his reaction, is, no, I don't have that disorder. I'm not going to go get an assessment. I'm not interested in marriage counseling. You're just blaming me for all the problems. Actually, you're the one that's at fault. You're the one that makes me this way. You make me behave this way. So those are the two extremes. On the one end, he can go, yeah, I think I do have some of those symptoms. That kind of makes sense to why we've had such a hard time. I'll go get a diagnosis. All the way to the other end, which he refuses to even accept the possibility that he has it and blames her for the problems. What makes the whole thing even more bizarre is that he doesn't even recognize that over the years he was gravitating more toward his activities and tasks and kind of leaving the relationship in the emotional sense. And so whenever she confronts him about that, he feels attacked because he honestly doesn't see that he has done anything wrong. But that's his truth. That's how he sees things, and the NT wife has her filter as well. So the whole thing seems to stem from, I'm just going to call it emotional blindness, for lack of a better term. It's kind of, he has the inability to identify and describe emotions experienced by himself and also in others. So it's kind of a problem in the sense of he lacks emotional awareness. Social attachment in the deepest form of attachment is difficult for him. Relating to others interpersonally is difficult unless it's work-oriented or has something to do with the task. They have difficulty distinguishing and appreciating the emotions of others, which often leads the NT wife to feel like he's very unempathic and very ineffective in how he responds emotionally. So with this emotional blindness, it can create interpersonal problems because the man with high functioning autism or Asperger's tends to avoid emotionally close relationships in general, especially with very tricky, messy relationships with his significant other. And I use the term messy because some of these men believe that the relationship has gotten so complicated over the years that it's like doing calculus. And he's utterly confused and baffled and honestly is feeling a huge amount of toxic guilt about the whole thing. He wants to please her. I've never met one man on the autism spectrum that said, yeah, I'm just out to get revenge and make my wife as miserable as possible. They really want to please. In many cases, they just simply don't know how to meet her needs. So one thing I hear from NT wives a lot is they say, yeah, as long as the conversations are very superficial, like about the weather or how to do the laundry or something, with respect to mundane everyday tasks. And she says, we get along pretty good, but if the conversation goes deep at all with respect to problem solving in the relationship or some kind of conflict resolution, she will say that's where I lose him. And he either agrees with me just to get me to shut up but never follows through, or he just leaves and he doesn't want to have any discussion there. But the good news is that there are ways to come up with a communication style or a problem-solving process such that the NT wife is getting some emotional reciprocity that she is starved for at this point without raising his anxiety, which causes him to shut down. But traditional marriage counseling will not accomplish that goal. The NT wife and the high-functioning autistic husband, they will need to find a person who is experienced in autism spectrum disorders and is pretty good at devising conflict resolution strategies that are sensitive to the traits of the disorder. Hey guys, this is Mark Hutten with AdultAspergersChat.com, and today I want to talk about why your Asperger's partner prefers tasks and objects over people and relationships. One of the main reasons that people with Asperger's syndrome and high-functioning autism prefer objects and tasks and even their work more so than family and friends and relationships is because their safety needs weren't met when they were a child, and I'll have to explain that. Safety needs, as you know, would be simple things like food, water, shelter, security, health, a safe environment, love and connection. So love and connection are just as important as food and water. As people, we are social creatures by nature. We have to have involvement with other people. For example, if a baby was born and it was put in the crib over there in the corner, even though it might be getting food and water, let's say nobody talked to it, nobody held it, this baby, even though it was getting food and water, would die because it's not getting one of its basic safety needs met. In this case, social connection with people. So Asperger's syndrome and high-functioning autism are developmental disorders. In other words, the person's social-emotional brain is underdeveloped. So when the social-emotional brain is somewhat stunted, you by default have social skills deficits, which is a huge problem because now you are a person who has to have social connection to survive, but by virtue of your deficits, you can't connect in a way that is going to meet that basic safety need. So what does one do when they realize they can't quite fit in, they can't quite get the acceptance that they need, or worse yet, they get teased, rejected, ostracized, and bullied? Well, you come up with a replacement. And that replacement is most often an object or a special interest. If you're in a relationship with, for example, a man with Asperger's syndrome and you're a neurotypical wife, you have probably witnessed that he is very wrapped up in a particular activity. It could be work, it could be computers, it could be some form of a hobby, but he spends an inordinate amount of time with a special interest or an object, and that is his replacement for social connection. And I'm not saying that he doesn't have any social connections, but he will prefer non-social activities. So when you spend most of your time and energy with things and activities rather than social and emotional connections, you are literally starving yourself. It would be similar to not getting enough water, not getting enough food, not getting enough sunlight, except in this way you're starving yourself from a psychological standpoint rather than a physiological standpoint. You are literally choosing emotional and social deprivation because you simply couldn't connect based on how your brain was wired in a socially acceptable way based on the neurotypical world. So what happens when you go through life malnourished in the social emotional sense? Well, the short answer is a lot of anxiety and depression. Wherever there is anxiety, depression is not far behind. And now we really start running into a lot of problems because when you're chronically anxious and have intermittent to chronic depression, this wears and tears on your immune system. It wears and tears on your self-confidence. It really inhibits quality relationships, which further drives you to gravitate towards objects and tasks, which in turn distance you even more from people and connections. You know, each of us have a limited amount of energy, and we use our energy either to be productive or to be protective. To use our energy to be productive means that we are getting up, we're getting out there with a sense of vitality and passion and drive, and we're working and we're helping people and we're making money and we're accomplishing things and we're building things and we're being creative. When we're spending most of our energy being protective, we don't have anything left over to be productive. If you've had a very stressful day where it just seems like there's one chaotic event after the other, by day's end, you know that you are exhausted. So to go through life under this chronic stress and with a weakened immune system, you often don't reach your full potential with respect to lifespan. In fact, the average life expectancy is about 72.6 years old. But for people on the autism spectrum, average life expectancy is about 54. So to summarize, social and emotional connections are essential. We need to have these to be both physiologically and psychologically healthy. But the Asperger's or high-functioning autistic brain is socially and emotionally underdeveloped, and this results in social skills deficits, which in turn results in the avoidance of any kind of events that involve social and emotional components. So now the person has a preference for non-social events in the form of tasks and objects. So I know this was a long way around the bush to address the issue of why people with Asperger's syndrome prefer objects and tasks rather than connections with people. But I hope this gives you a very comprehensive explanation for this. Okay, so now we want to look at why your partner or spouse with Asperger's syndrome or high-functioning autism tends to blame you for the relationship difficulties. If you, for example, are a neurotypical wife in a marriage with a husband with Asperger's syndrome, you probably have discovered that whenever there are issues or conflict, you are the bad guy, and he blames you for the relationship difficulties. And you may have had the thought many times, he is such a selfish, insensitive, uncaring bastard. And what if I were to tell you that that's probably not the case? Rather, the fact that he's not responding the way you would hope is due to one of the traits that he suffers from. We're specifically talking about theory of mind deficits. So let's look at that briefly. Theory of mind is an important social cognitive skill that involves the ability to think about mental states, both your own and those of others. It involves the ability to attribute mental states, including emotions, desires, beliefs, and knowledge. Not only does the theory of mind involve thinking about thinking, but it also refers to the ability to understand the ability to understand that others' thoughts and beliefs may be different from your own, and to consider the factors that have led to those mental states. Now, why is this called theory of mind? Well, psychologists refer to this as a theory of mind because our beliefs about what might happen or what might be going on in another person's head are just that, theories. They're kind of educated guesses. While we make predictions, we can definitely make predictions, but we have no direct way of knowing exactly what a person might be thinking or what their motivations might be. All we can rely on is our own theories or hypotheses that we develop based on what people say, how they act, what we know about their personalities, and what we can infer about their intentions. So why is this theory of mind stuff so important? Well, the emergence of a theory of mind is really critical during the developmental process. Very young children tend to be more egocentric, as I'm sure the parents in here are aware of, and are often unable to think about the mental states of others. Now, as people age, their theory of mind does emerge and continues to develop. So forging a strong theory of mind plays an important role in our social worlds as we work to understand how people think, to predict their behavior, to engage in social relationships, to solve interpersonal conflicts, and so on. So in order to interact with other people, it's important to be able to understand their mental states and to think about how those mental states might influence their actions. So in other words, you connect your guesstimate about what they're thinking with your guesstimate about how they may act based on their thinking. And this is all stuff that you do at a very unconscious level as a neurotypical. These things come about almost at just automatically. It's a natural state of mind, not so much with people with Asperger's. The theory of mind allows people to infer the intentions of others, as well as to think about what's going on in someone else's head, including hopes, fears, beliefs, expectations, and so on. So social interactions, as you know, can be very complex, even for neurotypicals. And misunderstandings can make them even more complex and confusing. By being able to develop accurate ideas of what other people are thinking, or at least fairly accurate ideas, we're better able to respond accordingly. So here is the problem. People with Asperger's and high-functioning autism have great difficulty with this theory of mind business. In fact, there's a lot of research on this that reveals that people on the autism spectrum have trouble using theory of mind to make moral judgments in many situations. There was one study that specifically found that Asperger's adults were more likely than neurotypical subjects to blame other people for their problems. And this is what I say, you may have experienced this with your husband. who has Asperger's syndrome. So the judgments of people with Asperger's rely more on outcome of the incident rather than on understanding the other person's intentions. Let me state that again. The judgments of people with Asperger's and high-functioning autism tend to rely more on the outcome of the incident rather than on understanding the other person's intentions. Here's an example, and this was part of the research. And in one scenario, James had a friend, and they were snowmobiling in an area known for loose snow. So this friend asks James if he should take an easterly route around a row of pine trees. And James had looked it up, and he did a little quick analysis while they were on the slopes, and he found out that they had an alert that avoiding the west slope was the safest way to go. And so he told his friend that going, the east route would probably be okay. So the friend takes off in that direction, but unfortunately starts an avalanche, which quickly overtook him and buried him alive. Now, in this scenario, and this was just a hypothetical scenario that the researchers put forth before these subjects, the researchers found that people with Asperger's were more likely than neurotypical subjects to blame James for his friend's death, even though James believed the slope was harmless. So that was kind of an interesting research project that does reflect the fact that judgments of people with Asperger's do tend to rely more on outcomes rather than on inferring what the other person's intentions were. So that was a long way around the bush to get to the point, and that is, this is why your partner or spouse with Asperger's or high-functioning autism does tend to blame you for the relationship difficulties, because he's only looking at the outcomes, in other words, what happened after the argument, rather than trying to understand your thoughts, feelings, motivations, intentions, and so on. So I want to address a general question that I get quite frequently, and it's along the lines of why is it that some men with Asperger's fall out of love seemingly overnight, especially in the early going of the relationship? Well, I wouldn't say falling out of love overnight is necessarily common for men with Asperger's or high-functioning autism, but it certainly does happen more so in the early going of the relationship. As a counselor who has worked with many couples affected by Asperger's and autism, what I see most often has to do with the fact that most men on the spectrum are very task-oriented. And oftentimes the scenario plays out something like this. In the beginning, the new girlfriend is the man's new task. He works on getting her to like him, to go on dates, to have sex, and so on. Also, in the beginning, he may try very hard to appear typical. In other words, he tries to avoid exhibiting any traits that may reveal his condition. So once he feels that he has won her over, so to speak, he begins to feel more comfortable around her. And it is during this time that he lets his guard down a bit and begins to exhibit some symptoms of the disorder that his girlfriend picks up on, although she may simply view his behavior as rather odd at the time. This is before she does her research online to see if he may have Asperger's. Anyway, once he has achieved his objectives, mission accomplished, right? In other words, he has completed the task of getting her to be with him. Unfortunately, due to mind blindness issues and problems with empathy, he doesn't understand that the relationship task is never ending. As most of us know, couples need to work on the relationship throughout its entirety, providing ongoing nurturing, love, and support. But this doesn't make sense to men on the autism spectrum. They think they have officially arrived and there's no need to continue to work on the relationship. Think of it like this. Let's say you live in California and drive to a vacation destination in New York, okay? That's a long, hard drive. Once you arrive at your hotel in New York, for example, you wouldn't continue to drive in circles in the parking lot of the hotel because you've already arrived at your destination, right? So, as odd as it sounds, this is analogous to romantic relationships in the mind of an individual with Asperger's or high-functioning autism. He thinks, I'm here, the work is done. Another issue that results from mind blindness and empathy deficits, we'll call it, which are two traits of the disorder, has to do with the Asperger's partner confusing love with obsession. I've talked to many men on the spectrum who thought that they were in love, only to find out that it was just an obsession or a special interest in the romantic phase of the relationship, which is roughly the first 3 months or so when everything is non-committal, fun, interesting, and so on. So once the romantic phase is over with, now the real work begins, right? It's no longer a party. For example, he has to have conversations about things that may not be so fun. For example, he may have to listen to your past troubles, trials, tribulations. He listens to you sharing your past, which is what most people do in order to build trust and a bond. He may have to go with you to family gatherings, and socializing is not a strong point of people with Asperger's. He has to work on conflict resolution, which is another skill that is typically lacking. He has to deal with the anxiety that goes with moving to the next level of the relationship, such as a proposal, marriage, having children, raising children, and so on. So now, in the mind of some men on the spectrum, the relationship is getting too messy and complicated, quite honestly, and therefore they kind of rethink their commitment level. So this certainly doesn't happen in all cases, obviously, but I can tell you from experience, the scenario that I just described is often typical in the case where he allegedly just falls out of love, quote unquote, overnight. I often get emails from men who are having relationship problems, and in many cases they're married and their wife is considering leaving, or maybe has already left, and they feel like they've done the best that they know how to do, and they're still confused as to why the relationship is not working out. In this case, the Asperger's man has heard so many complaints from his neurotypical wife, and the list is so long and deep, and the problems have been going on for so long that he feels like there's nothing that he can do at this point because there's just too many issues to have to address. He doesn't feel like he can redeem himself. And honestly, he has been giving it his best effort in most cases. Not 100%, and there are some traits of Asperger's syndrome that get in the way of relationships for sure. But the guy means well, and he really doesn't want to lose his wife, and so a lot of the emails I get, it's just like, what can I do? I'm going to lose her, and I don't know how to fix it. I've done what I thought I needed to do, but it's not enough, and it's never enough. And so they reach out to me via email, or they want to Skype with me, which is fine. And if you want to Skype with me, there's a link below this video, and we can set up a session and talk about this. But they're wanting to know, okay, where do I start? The problems are so long, and it's such a tangled mess, I don't even know where to begin. And oddly enough, this may be a surprise to most of you watching this video. The place to start is what you eat and drink. Yeah, what you eat and drink. Because what you put in your mouth affects how you think, it affects how you feel, it affects your behavior, it affects your outlook on life. Now, changing your diet is not going to be a magic bullet, but it is probably in the top 1 or 2 first steps in order to fix relationships. And I know it seems like a disconnect there. Well, what I eat has to do with my relationships. Yeah. You know, your brain runs on fuel that you feed it. Your brain deals with, of course, how you feel, how you think, how you perceive. And if it's not functioning to its full capacity, you're not going to see things right. And if you have Asperger's syndrome, you're already in a one-down position because you're hardwired to have, because of the disorder, you're hardwired such that you have social skills deficits anyway. So if you eat garbage, and especially if you medicate with alcohol or drugs, you have a double whammy. No wonder you're having problems. So you have to take care of your brain in a way that a neurotypical person doesn't have to worry about as much. You have to be on your 100% on your game because you're already in a one-down position because you have a developmental disorder. And what that means is that you are socially, emotionally more immature compared to your chronological age. So you want to get your immune system firing on all 8 cylinders so that your brain will function as well as it can. Well, how do you get your immune system to function on all 8 cylinders? You heal your gut. How do you heal your gut? You make sure you get plenty of whole food, plant-based nutrition. You want to make sure you're getting a ton of micronutrients. Forget about the macronutrients for now. You're probably getting plenty of protein and fat and carbs, but you're not getting enough micronutrients. So we're talking leafy green vegetables. We're talking especially cruciferous vegetables. We're talking smoothies that are chock full of spinach and kale and celery. So if you want to find something that is as close to a magic bullet as possible to help the process, or at least begin the process of healing your brain such that you will be relationship smart, you have to start with what you're feeding your brain. I know this seems like an odd connection. Diet will begin the process of healing my relationship. Yeah, because when you start giving your brain high quality nutrients, you're going to begin to think differently. You're going to have better clarity of thought. You're going to have better sleep, which is going to help you have better clarity of thought. It's going to improve your attitude. It's going to improve your mood. And all of these things will help you to function socially, emotionally at a much higher level than you are now. And you need all the help you can get, buddy. You need all the help you can get. And I don't mean that in a sarcastic way. If you're a man with Asperger's syndrome and you're in the process of losing your wife or your partner, or maybe you already have, you know that you're either just going to have to live the rest of your life by yourself, or you're going to have to make a radical change. And that radical change begins with what you're feeding your brain. Your brain is already in a one-down position because of the disorder. You can't afford to keep bonking your brain with crap. Because the more you do that, the more you're going to be out of focus of what's going on, the more you're not going to understand what your wife is truly feeling and wanting in the relationship. Your clarity of thought is in the toilet if you feed it garbage. You need as much clarity as you can get. And it starts with diet. It starts with healing your gut, which will improve your immune system, which will in turn clear up your head. And you need to clear up your head. It's already wired funky because of the disorder. You can't afford to tangle up the wiring even worse with junk food or alcohol or drugs. So there you go. That's the start. It's not the only thing you're going to need to do, of course, but it will be a huge start, because when you get to feeling better cognitively and emotionally, now you're going to start having some insight. Now you're going to start having some passion to really want to go in and fix this relationship. Now you're going to have some confidence in yourself. And that's a big start. All right. Thanks for listening. Click on the link below the video if you want some more information on what you can do to help this situation. Thanks, guys. See you later. Hey guys, this is Mark. Click on the join button underneath any of my videos, then click on members only videos, and then click on join. And for $9.99 a month, you'll have access to members only videos, which are excerpts from previous workshops I've conducted for NT partners, ASD partners, and the neurodiverse couple. New videos will be uploaded weekly.